That's just about the right amount of nutmeg, I think. Welcome to the Nutmeg Tavern. It's Friday, and we try almost every Friday at 4 o'clock, whenever possible, whenever we have an internet connection, to do this wonderful live stream. We're here live in the Nutmeg Tavern. This is a virtual tavern, and normally I am joined behind the bar. I am the host, John Townsend. Sorry, I forgot. I was getting ahead of myself. I'm the host, John Townsend. Normally behind the bar would be Ryan, but he's not there. Ryan is, he's on the other side of the time vortex.
Hey, guys.
There he is, running the console instead of Aaron, who should be here but isn't. And Kyle is in the hot seat. He's in the chat.
If you could see me around, Ryan.
Yeah, if you could.
My head is like over his shoulder.
I see you. I see you there. You're there. If you've got questions, whatever, you'll be interacting with Kyle here, and he'll be the go-between because, of course, I'm on the other side of the time vortex. Very difficult to kind of interact with people as I'm over here in the 18th century, but we make it happen. We make it happen every Friday. So we are having fun this Friday. Obviously, I had this topic picked out. I wanted to talk about it. Had all these pictures, artwork, and I was really going to dig into it. One of my favorite topics. But the elephant in the room is just way too big today and the last week and 2 weeks and month. So we are going to talk a bit about epidemics in the 18th century and health issues going on. And I've got a little bit of reading here to do. And it's an important topic for the time period. Because it's one of those kind of, both sides. We might as well learn from history, right? That's what we're here for. That's why we study history in the first place, is because we want it to be useful to us in the 21st century or wherever you are at, right? We want history to be helpful to us. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. Was there anything else that I needed to mention, Ryan?
Well, we should do it right up front. Somebody just asked if we're still going to the Kalamazoo Living History show.
Great question. The question is, Kalamazoo is coming up. It's this great, wonderful event that's happening in Michigan. No, it's not happening. Kalamazoo has been canceled. We won't be going to Kalamazoo. And in fact, I'm really concerned about the impact that this is going to have on living history, on events. This whole year undoubtedly will be very, very difficult for people in the history profession, working at historic sites. This is going to be just a crushing blow. A lot of historic sites really, really struggle, and having the population going through the historic site is going to be very, very detrimental. Some sites that are, national parks might not have that much trouble because they can fall back on the national, the federal government. But state sites, and especially sites that aren't, that don't have a bigger thing to kind of fall back on, private sites are really going to struggle this year. Keep that in mind. I don't know what anybody can do about it, but that's definitely going to be a very serious thing having to do with how people interact with learning about history and what that's all going to be about. So that's certainly in my kind of, what can we do about that? Right.
So real quick, already Super Chat is lighting up, so let me go through a few real quick.
Yes.
Mandatory Carry says, short this week and at work, but I'll come back afterwards.
Oh.
Dr. Treckware, hi guys, good to see you all in the tavern again. Could you consider talking about the early 1700s and the golden age of piracy? I feel like there's a lot of misinformation online about them. Nutmeg for life. Speaking of epidemics, let's talk about the White Plague. Timothy Kerncock says, take my Netflix subscription money. You deserve it. Thank you.
Okay.
Bob Monster says, really enjoy the live stream. And I think that's it for now. Oh, no, one more. John Kennington. I was reading the order book of Samuel Elbert, Colonial, the Georgia Brigade from 1776. He lists Celts as an issue item. Any idea what they are?
Spell it.
Kelts. That's all I got for now. Thank you so
Okay.
much, guys.
Yes.
We really appreciate that.
Yeah, big thank you. And I will, I will pencil in this topic of pirates and the early 18th century. Piracy is still something that's pretty active. It kind of changes shape. There's still some piracy later on in the 18th century, but that tail end of the age of piracy is a very interesting topic to see how that interacts with North America, and especially southern North America and the West Indies in this early 18th century time period. It would be a great topic and kind of fun. So I'll pencil that in for future topics.
I'm gonna throw in a couple more real quick.
Go ahead.
Joshy says, would you mind saying happy birthday to my son Shepard? It is his first birthday, and he loves watching you. I feel like this would make his day.
Shepard, happy birthday!
And then, so is your soup? Something like that? Best YouTube channel. Thank you so much, guys.
Yes, thank you. The White Plague. I am not familiar with what you were referring to, at least off the top of my head. So I'll have to look into that. And if you want to pop into the chat and give that just a little bit more so I know where you're going with that. But I will. Oh, there we go.
And History with Brad asks if we will be selling westward into Kentucky on the site.
No, your best bet is to use our link and go directly to that on Amazon. That's not a particular book that we sell. We mostly just sell our books and a few others. But we do have those book recommendations that you'll see here on the website or here on the YouTube channel, as well as there's a book recommendation page on our website that will take you to Amazon links, because it's just hard to compete with some of that kind of stuff. Celts. The name was Elbert, right? I'll look for that. Did he say a ledger? What did he say it was?
Let me look back and I'll get back to you.
Anyway, there are a lot of different record books, an amazing quantity of sort of record books that are available especially for the war time period. Different people, whether they're sergeants or low officers, sometimes corporals, took care of the records for a particular regiment, right? And so you'll have some very interesting records, sometimes very helpful, sometimes not so helpful, but you can get hints from them. And a reference like this, where something is issued and like, okay, what is that? Very helpful for knowing just how well troops were supplied and how well they weren't, what happened. Yes?
So he says the order book of Samuel Elbert, Colonial of the Georgia Brigade. Brigade is apparently a difficult word for me to say. Sorry.
Orderly.
Somebody else just commented the word tuberculosis.
Oh,
That's
yeah.
white plague.
There you go.
They're saying.
Yes.
Nutmeg for life. Thank you very much.
Yeah, there's a bunch of different sort of diseases that are going through and are all kinds of trouble in early America. Trouble for the Europeans there, of course, double difficult for the Native Americans who got exposed to all these diseases that they hadn't been exposed to for centuries, and of course that was very detrimental, and large quantities of Native American population died off in the 16th, 17th, 18th century and later because of diseases that come through. But there are other ones that are just, they're devastating to just the regular population, or the European population that comes in. So something like tuberculosis, we don't necessarily you don't see, we know the term tuberculosis. Something like the White Plague might be a term, or something like consumption is one of those things you'll see referenced in a lot of different books. And that's just something that's, endemic all through the time period. And they didn't know what was going on with it. But one of the diseases, one of the diseases that was really important for sort of Revolutionary War time period is what's happening with smallpox. And they had a little bit more clue about what's happening with smallpox. They had this, it's a little bit more physically obvious about how it's caught, how contagious it is. There were things going on, all the way from, and it's something that is happening everywhere, basically. And that's an issue in the early 18th century as well as Revolutionary War time period. It turns out that there was a great quantity of the population that were all the way into adulthood, hadn't had smallpox right there in the 1770s. And they were very susceptible, and Washington was very, very concerned that smallpox would sweep through the army and just lay waste to it, so that his army was down, wasn't able to fight. It's not nearly as much of a concern as maybe 5% of the people are sick or whatever. You can work around that, but when half your people are sick, that is just, it's not viable. You can't fight a war like that. So he was very concerned about that, especially with what was happening in Boston. As the British were there and there was smallpox going through the population there, the British leave Boston, and then he's very concerned about sending troops into Boston right away because he's worried that they'll get smallpox. And there's even some concern that the British were letting some people leave the city in hopes that they would spread the contagion into the colonial army. So it's a bunch of stuff going on with smallpox. But the one I wanted to talk about today was yellow fever. Yellow fever, endemic all through this time period in the southern colonies, and especially in something like the West Indies, the Caribbean. The kind of warm climate, and of course, yellow fever is something that's kind of a two-part thing. You have the disease, and then you have to have mosquitoes as the carrier. And this made it very, very difficult for the medical industry at the time to figure out what was going on, because it was this two-part thing. It's like, is this malaria? Does this have to do with the air? Does this have to do with, catching something like the cold? Or is this something, totally different? Yellow fever gets into places like New York City and Baltimore and Philadelphia in the late 18th century. Didn't have a problem with it in the early 18th century, but in the 1790s, 1800, 1802, 1805, yellow fever sweeps through these cities and is just devastating. So there's this wonderful book, travels of 4.5 years. I love that. It's like 4.5. He could have just said 4 years, but no, 4.5 years in the United States of America. John Davis, he's from Great Britain. Really, really interesting book. It's not too big. A lot of these journal books, they're just massive, but John Davis is a great writer for the time period. A young man, he comes to America kind of wanting to bum around. He does a book translation that kind of gets him semi-famous, and then he goes around. He's like a tutor and stuff, and he gets a traveling companion that he meets who's a doctor. Anyway, they travel from let's see where they're. In Delaware area, and they're traveling to Philadelphia by coach. Let's see. A spacious road conducted us to Philadelphia, which we entered at Front Street. I had expected to be charmed with the animation of the American metropolis, which Philadelphia at the time was our capital. But melancholy silence prevailed in the streets. The principal houses were abandoned, and none but French people were found seeking pleasure in society. Everybody else had abandoned the place. he frequents because he's a learning kind of person. He's very interested, and he stops by the library, and he starts going to the library. At this library, during 3 successive afternoons, I enjoyed the calm and the pure delight which books afford. But on the 4th, I found access denied, and the librarian had fled from the yellow fever, which spread consternation through the city. Of the fever, I may say that it momentarily became more destructive. Sorrow sat on every brow, and nothing was to be seen but coffins carried through the streets unattended by mourners. Indeed, it was not a time to practice modes of sorrow or adjust the funeral rites, but the multitude thought only of escaping from the pestilence that wasted at noonday and walked in the darkness. This was a period to reflect on the vanity of human life, the mutability of human affairs. Philadelphia, which in the spring was a scene of mirth and riot, was in the summer converted to a sepulchre for the inhabitants. The courts of law were shut, and no subtle lawyer could obtain a client, and the door of the tavern was closed, and the drunkard was without strength to lift the bowl to his lips. No theater invited the idle to behold the mimic monarch strut his hour upon the stage. The dice lay neglected on the gaming table, nor did the dancing room re-echo with the steps of the dancer. Man was now humbled. He goes on. He's a fun writer. At length, he connects back with the doctor. Toward the end, they sit on the porch of an abandoned house and talk and have this connection. And then finally, after they've been there for, however long, they decide maybe, he says, finding all business suspended at Philadelphia and the atmosphere becoming hourly more noisome, we judged it prudent to leave the city without delay. And finding a vessel at the wharves ready to sail for Charleston in South Carolina, we agreed for passage and put our luggage on board, which is what most people did in this circumstance. In Philadelphia, in these times, people just abandoned the city. It's like, time to get out, let's go. And that's how they dealt with it. The concern, there was a large uproar within the learned society of medical about whether or not this had to do with the location. Is this yellow fever something that is in the air? Is it something, some mineral thing? What's going on? Or was it contagious? Was it some kind of disease brought in that's just going from person to person? And there was a whole bunch of people that were studying this. All the doctors really wanted to know. Noah Webster, let me see if I can find that section. Noah Webster decided, he got together and he said, as a malignant fever has for 3 summers past raged in different parts of the United States and proved fatal to a great number of our fellow citizens, and extremely prejudicial to the commerce of our country, it becomes highly important to take such efficacious steps as human wisdom can devise to prevent the introduction and arrest the progress and mitigate the severity of such a serious calamity. So he decides, he says, you know what we ought to do? We ought to get all these people together with their knowledge. I will print it all so that somebody can come up with the answer to this. So they were studying the yellow fever. They did really kind of yucky experiments. Something that happens at the end of yellow fever is this black vomit thing, and they thought maybe that was the part that was contagious, and they were doing all these experiments with it, breathing it in and all of that. But the doctors were doing most of that on themselves. They would test these things on themselves and see if they got it, right? So really, really interesting. And it ended up taking another 100 years to figure out what yellow fever really was. But it really expanded science as these medical doctors were experimenting and trying to figure out what it was. So a lot of things were learned, not necessarily how to save themselves from yellow fever, but a lot of medical things were learned. And right here in North America, where there's kind of a budding of medical learning. So it's just tremendous stuff. And this book, it's funny. He goes to Charleston, right? He gets there, he becomes a tutor for a family, but he doesn't escape yellow fever. There's yellow fever in Charleston, of course, and in fact the family he tutors for, they leave their normal abode during the summertime, and they have a special summertime vacation house right out by the ocean where they move so that they don't get yellow fever. Incredible topic.
Well, I have a bunch more super chats. And then we'll get into some questions on the topic because I'm sure Kyle has some thoughts up.
Oh, yeah.
So, real quick,
Yes.
Speed and Style Tony.
There we go.
Missed last week the biggest pandemics of the 17th and 18th centuries were all of the European diseases affecting the Native Americans.
Yeah.
Sad but true.
Yep.
CJ Outdoors just sent a donation. Thank
you
you very much.
Thank you.
Enzo Vinci. Hi, guys. Wasn't here last Friday, but here now. Yay.
Yeah.
Just ordered some candles and a new hat from your website. Hopefully it fits.
Oh yeah.
Ellen Hughes says, do we have an idea of exactly what the illnesses were that caused such devastation within the Native American community? And Mimzil says, this is my Friday highlight. Thank you for the awesome content. Question, how available was butter for the common person? It seems common in the recipes.
Yeah, so smallpox is one of the biggies for Native American population. Smallpox had been in Europe for a long time, and there was kind of some built-up immunity. There was nothing like that in the Native American community, and smallpox is just horrific and just can lay waste to great quantities of the population. So that's probably one of the biggies. Something like yellow fever, that had been around, at least in parts of North America, forever, right? But smallpox was... Were you going to say something, Ryan?
I'm getting some kind of... Can you speak?
Can I speak?
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, okay, sorry.
For some reason on the instrumental channel there was crazy interference, and I had to figure out what that was.
Gotcha.
So we're gonna continue on without music for a little while.
Yeah.
Sorry, guys.
Technical issues, but on we go. So yeah, I think probably smallpox is one of the biggies there. But I mean, any of those diseases that come through, they just didn't have experience with those, and those. They would just go through those populations because they had absolutely no immunity to them. Butter is one of those sorts. Butter is a classic way to preserve milk. Milk does not last in and of itself very long at all. So, I mean, it can turn directly into something like clabber, where you just kind of leave the milk by itself and, it separates into, kind of whey and curds, clabbered stuff. You can also just basically immediately churn it and turn it into something like butter. It lasts a little bit longer like that, and then you can salt that butter and it will last a great period of time. It's a way to store milk. Another way to store milk is cheese, of course. That's even a better way, kind of, but it takes longer to process. But all those things are fairly inexpensive compared to other food products like, fancy cuts of meat, etc. So butter definitely on that list of pretty much anybody can afford it.
All right, Kyle, do you have any questions?
I do. I have many, actually. I know there were things like typhus epidemics,
Yeah.
but what other diseases could sweep through whole communities, decimating the population? I know we got yellow fever.
Right, we got yellow fever, we got smallpox. Cholera is one of those classic ones, typhus, and then there's typhoid. And, there are even things, well, I'm not gonna talk about some of those other ones. But yeah, those are some of the big classics. They're gonna run through those. And again, it's like some of the things that you would do naturally help stop the spread of that. Something like yellow fever, and then, they knew it's like, well, either if this is contagious person-to-person transmission, which yellow fever wasn't, then leaving the area would help. And if it's a location thing, well then leaving the area helps. So either one of those, they would sort of leave. But if you had something like smallpox, now that was a trickier thing, and they were learning about inoculation early on. Even in the 18th century, inoculation was a thing. It both helped and hurt. So people that would get inoculated could continue to spread the disease, even though it helped them. They learned fairly early on that if they purposefully gave people smallpox, even putting it in there, they would like open up a little piece of skin and put a piece of smallpox in there. They found that if the person caught it that way, it was much less difficult for them to overcome than if they naturally caught smallpox. Really weird. Don't know why that's true, but it is true. Then they actually learned how to, make that better and better. But they would do all sorts of things to, sort of make the person very weak so they would catch it. And later on, they learned they didn't need to do that. But I think something like in the cholera situation, in some of the like typhus and the other ones, and even something like malaria, and malaria is another one very similar to yellow fever. That's in North America, in places like Michigan, which you wouldn't think would have a malaria problem, had a malaria problem. Just cleaning up the community was something that was going on even within this smallpox debate. Some of people thought it's just because there's garbage in the streets and whatnot. And yeah, that certainly was an issue. Something like cholera might cause a problem with just sanitation issues. But clean water was also an idea here. It's like, clean water is something we really need, and that will help have us not have as much disease. So, and when they finally learned that, both malaria and yellow fever were mosquito diseases, then of course you got to get rid of all those mosquito breeding areas and draining swamps and whatnot to make those cities much more healthy.
Did the speed of travel prolong or slow down the spread of contagion?
Well, it seems like this particular yellow fever that comes into, I think, Philadelphia first, 1793 maybe, or 95, that comes in with they at least think, it comes in with a particular shipload of people. And in that case, ships were moving fairly quickly. And somebody who, maybe in the case of yellow fever, wasn't all that sick, but came from the West Indies, travel was fast enough that they were able to go ahead and transmit that. Then mosquitoes would bite those sick people, and the mosquitoes would bite other people and get them sick. But you can think that's compared to something like smallpox or something like, tuberculosis, where people like cough on you, that's a fairly kind of slow ratchet on, getting people sick, a fast moving disease. So the travel was still pretty quick. So I think that was still an issue for them. Not like it would be in an era where you have much, much quicker travel with airplanes and whatnot, but still, from going city to city, Philadelphia, New York City and Baltimore, you're not that far apart. So even in the age of the horse.
How was garlic used as a medicine in North America in the 18th century?
It certainly was thought of as both a food thing. Now, a lot of authors didn't think that much of it as a food item, but it's certainly mentioned, not necessarily in recipes, but as individual writers, journal writers, would talk about garlic being in the food. But Amelia Simmons in 1796 says, oh yeah, garlic, yeah, it really should be used mostly in medicine. How were they using it? That I would have to look in the pharmacological books of the time period, and some of them don't mention it a lot. They're just kind of offhand. Yeah, they use it in medicine. It might be something like I mean, even in the time period, they were doing things like putting things on the soles of people's feet. Like onions or something like garlic, and they might use it in a poultice. So, make it into a mush, and then put that on an exterior part of your body, and then put, a bandage over the top of that to topically treat an area. But I'm not sure about how it was administered in other ways other than that.
Hey, Max Art Cool just hopped
Hey, Mac.
in and
Yep.
said, "Stay well, Townsends team."
Thank you. Thank you very much.
What did they use to treat coughs and colds in the 18th century?
We've covered this recently, haven't we? I forgot what I said. I think they mostly used alcoholic beverages.
How was pine and spruce trees used for medicine?
Well, you had two choices, and this was a question that seemed to pop back. I saw it in the questions after the fact some other time. So we've done the episode on spruce beer, where they used spruce in brewing and created a somewhat or slightly efficacious drink against scurvy. And it certainly is kind of a spicy thing, and it is a flavor that you can generate where you really don't have many options. So in the spruce beer situation, they snipped spruce buds. Now, spring is the time to do it if you really want to get the good stuff, where it's nice and soft green growth that's fresh. But sometimes that probably wasn't always available. You'd snip those off. You'd fill up this great big bucket pot, and then you'd boil it, and then it would for a long time until the bark started to peel off the wood. And then you created this, and it's wonderful smelling. It's amazing smell when you make this stuff. But you would make spruce essence, is what it was called. You'd strain all that, the solids off, and you'd have this very, very yellowy looking wood water when you're done with that. And you'd use that to brew your beer, usually with molasses as your sugar content, or maybe even maple syrup. Oh yeah. And then you'd brew beer with that instead of using like malted barley. This is made with a different kind of material. So the question is, and there's a lot of folks that think that the idea that this spruce was medicinal came from the Native Americans, especially up in Canada, because that's where the black spruce grows. Like down here in northern Indiana, black spruce is not a spruce that grows here. Well, blue spruce grows here, but not, we don't have black spruce, and that's what makes the best of the spruce essence. And the thought was that the Native Americans were curing people that were sick, especially even Europeans, that they were very helpful with their sharing their medicine. And one of the things they would make would be a tea or an infusion of black spruce in those regions. Because it's like all these different Indian nations had different medical ideas, and ones up there, they had that material available to them. And they probably wouldn't boil it a lot, but actually kind of smash it and then make a light infusion of that. And that's what the Europeans came in and said, oh, we're going to take this idea, but we don't like the idea of this tea infusion. We're going to make beer with it, obviously, right?
Right.
Did plagues follow great changes in food/stress events?
Well, I would say that some of that is definitely a driving factor, and especially in the case of something like smallpox and the Revolutionary War. We have this large migration of soldiers coming into North America, especially coming into an area that didn't have as much smallpox, coming from an area that had a lot more, much more, common for everyone in Great Britain at the time. So all these soldiers from Great Britain come over because of the Revolutionary War, and it spreads a lot more quickly. There's thought that even something like the Spanish flu in the early part of the 20th century was kind of, driven partially by the First World War. There's a million theories on those kinds of things. But I would say that it's quite likely that in a situation where war or a lot of displacement of people, disease is obvious.
I don't think it's appropriate that Aaron is in the comment
What?
thread heckling me.
Why isn't he
I
here
don't
doing
know.
the job?
He's supposed to be driving somewhere.
Hey.
Are you driving and commenting? Jeez Louise.
Terrible. Do we know what proportion of Revolutionary War casualties were due to disease versus combat? Ooh, that's an interesting question.
I think that there's certainly been some research. It's hard to lock those things down. The record keeping of that isn't exactly perfect. And there are places, there are times when, some conscientious person, medical person, or, maybe even clergy or whatnot, really records things. Whether or not they understand why they're doing it, they record these things, and so we can get these little snapshots that give us an idea about what the bigger picture is. But the consensus is that disease was a much bigger killer than actual combat in the Revolutionary War time period.
How were doctors trained in North America?
Most doctor kind of situations, you would study kind of in different kinds of medical universities, and some of the very best. I was thinking of, is it Mitchell or no? It was somebody else. One of these books talks about this particular doctor. I think it's Cottrell, who was studying in both in sometimes you'll study in France. Scotland was a big place to go and study medicine. You could study medicine in London, and there were some of those places to study medicine starting up in the 18th century in North America. But a lot of doctors started off in Europe someplace, and then they came to North America to study. And you would study, but you usually kind of studied under different doctors, and it was a lot more sort of intern or let's say apprentice kind of a situation. And you definitely learn by doing in those kinds of situations. We've done the episode, and we talked to Maggie several different times about resurrectionists and the idea of collecting corpses so that doctors could study them. There's no reason to go and collect some corpse unless it made you some money, and they would collect these bodies so that doctors could dissect them and learn about the interior processes and how to treat people, do surgeries, and all these sorts of things. Kind of ghoulish, but it's happening, and it's a very major thing that's happening in North America in the late 18th century, early 19th century, and beyond, where they would bring these bodies and give them to doctors to work with. So there's a lot of that kind of medical study that's going on, and it is a lot more apprentice-like than we might think of today.
Was throat distemper an earlier term for diphtheria?
Diphtheria, scarlet fever, and they've got all these wonderful, fun names like that we wouldn't kind of recognize. What did I say earlier? Consumption, right? Tuberculosis. And in yellow fever's case, they were calling them like intermittent fevers, or they had these names about how this kind of fever just keeps coming back over and over again. And so I'm not sure about whooping cough, another one of those similar ones. Scarlet fever and diphtheria. So I'm not way up on some of those.
How common was it for early farmers to catch a disease from their livestock?
Well, we have issues like brucellosis. That is something that you might get from your livestock. And there's the cowpox, which is actually very, very positive in that you would get a smallpox-like disease, and it would, if you got that, it was very, very mild. And of course, you didn't, then you were mostly immune to getting smallpox. So it's one of those very, very close, and much rather get cowpox than get smallpox. So how many other diseases? I can't think of any others right now.
There was a smallpox, but was there ever large pox?
Let me tell you, smallpox was bad enough. You wouldn't want to have large pox.
What was used as disinfectant?
They used sulfur a lot, and burning sulfur. The piece that the one gentleman talks about, I think it's Mitchell or somebody else, in yellow fever. He was all about, it's like water. Let's bring in clean water. That's the main. I just washing things. He was just very, very concerned about that, and that was the biggie disinfectant. I don't think they had ideas about other things that much. Sulfur was a biggie, so they would burn sulfur, and the sulfur fumes would fumigate things.
Hey, I'm going to jump in real quick with some housekeeping. Number one, let's mention Kalamazoo one more time.
Kalamazoo. So every year about this time, right around the St. Patrick's Day weekend, there's this amazing event happening in Kalamazoo. Big rooms, lots and lots of vendors. Great one. We always go to it. It's canceled this year, so it's not going to happen. So don't travel 5 hours to see us at Kalamazoo because we won't be there. You'll have to watch us here on the live stream.
And then I have the link for the book that John was reading from
Yes.
today. I'm posting in the chat right there.
Travels of 4.5 years in the United States of America. He's traveling from 1798 to 1802. Mr. Davis is a great fun writer, has some fun little adventures, and it gives you a glimpse of what life is like in the early 18th century or early 19th century, late 18th century. He doesn't pull any punches. All these guys are dealing with all the things that we think about in North America, the good things and the bad things. You'll find them in this book.
I think that he is one of the easier journals to read.
Yeah.
Some of them can feel dry.
Right. Especially something like Peter Kalm. Very, very interesting, but he spends about half his time talking about trees.
Yes, right. And the others are really scattered.
Right,
So,
exactly.
Unless you really like trees.
Well, trees are great, right? But he's talking about the scientific part of trees that we already know. So, it's neat to kind of get the idea of understanding how much he didn't know. But unless you're really, really up on the particular species and all that, then it's not all that helpful.
So Enzo Vinci popped in with another super chat. It said, just finished stocking up. How would that work in the 18th century? Also, I forgot I won another award with your help. Thanks again.
Excellent. I am so happy we've been helpful to you. Wish I could win awards.
Yeah,
like that.
maybe you could pass on some of that.
Yeah, no. Stocking up. So, in North America, people were already stocking up. And so I don't think it's nearly, and don't ask me about toilet paper, okay? Just don't do it. Just don't go there. And why? We've tried to figure out what this is with toilet paper. Is it like people think you can throw the roll out on your front lawn and then it's going to come in and go someplace else? Anyway.
Stocking up.
People stocked up kind of naturally.
I don't know what just happened, but
Got lost.
let's stay on
I'm
course
just trying
here.
to figure out this toilet paper thing.
Man.
So yeah, I think it's pretty natural, and they were used to roughing it more than we are, right? And maybe part of the idea of let's get out of town had to do with let's get out of town where we won't have problems getting stuff. So I think part of that is driven by that. The idea of stocking up, they were always stocking up. The idea of, the seasonality of foods naturally causes you to stock up. You want to have apples in April? Well, you better have thought about that in August because You're not going to the store to buy them.
Yeah, that was hitting us. That was difficult for our recipe choosing for videos like this week. We should have made the stuff that we're talking about 3 months ago.
Yeah, exactly.
What you got, Kyle?
All right, I have one more question about the main topic, and then we'll jump into just normal, everyday questions.
Great.
All right. Since swamps were such breeding grounds for mosquitoes that carry disease, why did settlers move into swampy areas down south anyway? Were there resources they felt they were worth the risk?
Well, the swampy areas are very, very fertile. So, I mean, you kind of naturally get those two things going on together. And it isn't necessarily just swamp areas that are mosquito breeders. Think about the idea of sanitation from the other side, and it's like, they didn't have sewers. They had cesspits. Yeah. So,
Well,
I mean,
also,
talk about mosquito breeders and disease breeders.
There's a lot of area. I mean, try not to be in a swamp. And, and a lot of that,
Right.
It's like...
It's just the only place available.
Right. A lot of the Midwest was very swampy.
Yes, until it was drained.
Right.
Northern Indiana was a giant swamp.
All right, Kyle.
Real quick, some people are asking about your jacket there, John. Would you like to explain it?
Today, I decided today was the day. I only wear this outfit about once every 6 weeks. This is the early 19th century tailcoat. So, 1810, 1812, all the way up into 1820, and then it starts to change a little bit. There's the classic vest that's underneath, which is, got the little stand-up collar. This is, say like 1805 to 1820 or so. And then it starts to change a little bit, and the lapels open up. Double-breasted tailcoat here. You can't see it. I'm not going to stand up. But it's got, tails and everything. And it cuts off right at the waistline so that you can see what's going on. All these fashions, like, what's happening with your trousers, what's happening with your waistcoat or your vest, and what's happening with your coat, they all go together. They lock together. Each thing kind of shows off the item underneath it. The way the cuffs are done, completely different. It's great to watch and see how fashions change through time period, how you go from the weird, the coats, not weird, just the coats of 1780 to 40 years later, and you've got coats like this, and it's completely different. And you say, how did they go from one to the other? And then you look right in between, and you see this transition style coat. Great.
Okay. Did decanters exist? If so, what were they made out of, and what did they look like?
Yes, certainly. Decanters are existing in the time period, and a lot of them are glass. So, I mean, you want to see what's in them, the pretty stuff inside them.
Were dictionaries accurate in the 18th century? Have they changed since? Words, layout, etc.?
Johnson had his classic dictionary in the 18th century. Noah Webster, we talked about the Webster that I talked about earlier, and I read about him, collecting what the doctors were saying and printing it. He was the Noah Webster of Webster's Dictionary. So, there is this thought by some people that it's like, hey, we need to standardize spelling. We need to standardize the meaning of these words over larger geographic areas, because you find pretty quickly as you go reading in the 18th century, these things were not standardized. Spelling was ad hoc, baby. Everybody spelled everything with the way they felt about it, which is actually helpful. And sometimes people might change the spelling of a word like 3 or 4 different times in the same work. They might be writing a letter and spell the word differently each time they actually wrote it down. Now that can be confusing, but most people could work through that, and we work through that today, don't we? You'll get some strange email, and it's all misspelled on purpose, but we read right through it just like that because we know what's going on with that. They had the same thing in the 18th century, not that it was done on purpose, but they didn't have any trouble understanding what the author was saying there, unless they were using some word that was very, very strange to them. And even then, if you look at how words kind of morph from sort of region to region, you'll see that the words are similar. They might drop some of the letters at the beginning, but words could be very, very regional in the time period. So we found that with drink names, right? So, it's like you might call it flip, and somebody two counties away might call it slip. But it was similar, and you could kind of figure it out from the context.
I think the biggest difference from a modern dictionary that I've noticed is that it's a spelling and a definition. It's not telling you it's an adjective or a noun or anything like that, and it's not using it in a sentence to help give you better clarification.
Is it true that ships are no longer in use? Let me start again. Is it true that ships that are no longer in use get stripped of their masts and get used as floating lighthouses or cranes?
Yeah, so they would use them as sheer hulks. So, you could use a used up ship for a lot of different things. This ship is no longer seaworthy. What are we going to do with it? We could use it as a prison ship. So we could strip it of its masts, leave all the interior things, and lock people in it as a prison. We could use it as a sheer hulk, which is basically like a crane. You could, kind of haul it around. You could, tow it with boats to where you needed to, and then use it as a crane to help other ships put their masts in. You could use it as a receiving ship, so they might anchor it permanently in one location, kind of as a prison ship, kind of, depending on the British Navy in the time period, bring people on board, use it to hold them in location until you could distribute them to other ships. Many times they were just broken up. The ship is no longer useful, it wouldn't float well, we're just going to break this up and sell it as firewood. And there were all these different grades of ships in the time period. Some things were made very quickly in remote locations. They might be made of green wood, and they would shrink and not last very long at all. The wood would rot very quickly. So you had all these different sorts of ages. It's like buying a really cheap car versus a really nice car. Is it gonna just, run out and nobody's gonna, is it gonna get used up and junker right away, or is it gonna be, this is worth something 30 years later? So, you don't see very many Vegas driving around on the road these days, right? So, and the other thing is, the situation, in our modern context, what happens with old tractor trailers, right? Semi-trailers. Well, it's no longer roadworthy, but I might park it and use it as a shed. Same thing with an old giant ship. What are we going to do with this thing? We might use it to store things. We might break it up. All kinds of great examples.
Somebody commented like an old truck bed, they can haul it behind another ship and use it as a trailer.
Right, and you might even use it as a barge. Yeah, in that kind of situation, it's like, we can drag it behind something else.
So we got time for two more really great questions, like the best questions ever. Ooh. Kyle.
Okay. Well, I think this one is a good one. Is there any update on the condition or future plans for the canoes?
Canoe stories.
Wait, do we have canoes?
We have canoes.
Oh, I forgot about that.
Good. So, when was that? When did we do the canoe series?
October.
Was it last year?
October 17th.
17.
No. October 18th, excuse me.
It was the year before, wasn't it?
I have no idea.
It was a year in October.
Yeah.
October 18th.
Because last year we were doing the cabin.
Right. So, October of 2018, you'll find our Dugout Canoe series. Time flies. Let me tell you. So we built this giant, 18 foot, 16 foot long, whatever, giant, hewn out of a huge tulip tree log canoe. Last year we did the video on raising it back up out of the pond, because this kind of canoe you sink to the bottom of the pond and then bring it up after the wintertime is over and ice is off the pond. I should bring it up sometime. And then we also built 2 cottonwood dugouts. Although you haven't seen them. We haven't done any videos on them, but you might have actually seen them in some videos. Occasionally we bring them out. So we've got this fleet of dugout canoes, and we're hoping, barring strange health issues and whatever, I don't even want to go there.
Man.
Hopefully we'll be doing a canoe trip later on this spring. Depending,
it's on the calendar.
it's on the calendar.
We mean well.
We'll do our very best. And on that topic of we'll do our very best, we're gonna keep making videos, guys. Whether or not weird things happen and stuff, we're gonna keep making videos.
Yeah.
Whether you like it or not.
Yeah.
We have figured out, even if we're locked down in our homes, we will keep making videos.
Yep.
We have the technology, and
we can do it.
We can do it, and
we
we
wanna
will
do
do
it.
it.
It's gonna be fun.
We're gonna be here for you, even if you can't leave your house. You can always watch YouTube, and we'll keep making videos.
Yes.
Do we have one more question?
One more question.
One more question.
Why is lamb rarely eaten in the U.S. today? It was more popular in the 18th century. Best wishes.
Man.
Excellent question. Lamb. This is one of the few times a year when lamb is almost always, you can actually find it. And of course, to the American palate, typical American palate, maybe I should say, lamb is not something that we are accustomed to, and we don't really, run out and say, "Ooh, let's all go eat lamb. Let's have lamb burger or whatever."
Which is crazy because it's delicious.
Is it?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Somebody must
Real
eat
good.
lamb more than I do.
Lamb's good stuff.
Real good.
Yeah. A lot of that has to do with what is subsidized and what isn't. Yeah, I know you don't want to hear that, but whether or not. What? Did I go someplace I wasn't supposed to go?
Speaks the truth.
Oh no.
Jeez.
Anyway, American farmers are encouraged to grow chickens, to grow cows, to grow pigs. American farmers aren't necessarily encouraged to grow lambs or sheep. One of the things that shows up just over and over in English 18th century cookbooks is mutton. Nobody eats mutton in the United States.
When I was 19,
Yeah.
I sold a business called Omar's Eero in Louisville, a telephone line. And anytime I worked that neighborhood, he would give me free gyros, and they were awesome.
Yeah.
I like lamb a lot.
I would also have to say that raising lamb or sheep or whatever you want to say is a little harder than it is for cows from past experience. When I was a kid, we had sheep.
Okay.
So.
Yeah. So obviously somebody with more experience than I do. If you want to answer that question, please ask Kyle.
I think everybody needs to know in the chat. And even though the nutmeg was the first thing to go off the grocery store shelves, we have plenty. We will make it through.
Oh,
Yeah.
nutmeg?
Our stock it's up. We're supplied.
We have it. We have it.
Don't be
We're not
nervous.
going to run out. Be calm. We have the nutmeg.
Yes. Now don't
scared
call us and ask for any because
Yeah.
we're not
It's in
feeling
the
too
vault,
friendly about it.
and I don't know if I have the keys.
If anybody had the keys, it'd be you.
Patreon every week.
Oh yes.
Every week I try to get the new Patreon people, so people help support what we do here. With all this crazy, wacky stuff we do, making strange videos, they help us by giving us a little bit of money each month on Patreon. The new Patreon people this week, Devin Jessup, Dustin, Dub Train. I think I wrote that down right. No, it's not Dub. That's an N. DNB Train. Melissa Fabersher, Ian Hunt, Maria Christine, and Abigail Merlis are all brand new people that are supporting us on Patreon. More than 600 people help support us that way. It really helps us kind of budget and say, okay, what videos can we afford to make? And so, can we afford to go here? Can we afford to do that? So you guys make that possible. Thank you so much for your incredible help with that. Also, no, we're okay. We're covered. We've figured it all out now. We're good.
I don't know what
done it
you're
all?
referring to.
I think we're good.
He's good. He's good. He doesn't
Yeah.
even know where he's at. He can't even remember where he's at.
Where's Aaron? Aaron, come back.
Help, Aaron. So, these people on Patreon help us out. You've helped us out with Super Chat. That is another way to help us out. Even the book, going to our website and looking at things, and just plain being here, being with us, interacting, coming into the virtual Nutmeg Tavern, watching our videos, commenting, sharing our videos with other people. They might be bored here in the next couple weeks. You might need to send them a link and say, anyway, thank you guys for all your amazing things that you do for us. Thanks for watching today and have a great weekend.